The galaxy had forgotten what fear felt like. For centuries, its great civilizations had learned to contain violence, to cage it behind rules and codes, to make it civilized. The empires of the stars fought their wars with precision, with treaties, with restraint. Planets were conquered, yes, but never annihilated. Armies were defeated, but never erased. Even in conquest, there was a certain etiquette, a shared illusion that order could survive in the shadow of destruction. That illusion ended when they came to Earth. The dominion of Zelor, the oldest, coldest, and most merciless empire in the galaxy, had ruled for millennia. The Zari, reptilian overlords bred for dominance, had enslaved hundreds of species and extinguished thousands more. They were ruthless, but not chaotic. They believed in hierarchy, in control, in the idea that power meant responsibility. When they expanded into the Orion Arm, they expected another collection of primitive colonies, perhaps a few scattered outposts. They found a blue planet circling an unremarkable star, Earth. To them, it was nothing, a backwater world with crude technology, its people divided by superstition, politics, and pride. A world that had never traveled beyond its own moon. The Zari saw no challenge, no risk. They saw only an opportunity for their young generals to earn glory. When the invasion began, it was not even called a war. It was an operation, a training exercise. They descended upon Earth with fleets that blotted out the sky, their ships shimmering in the upper atmosphere like a false dawn. They sent messages of surrender, expecting obedience. When humanity refused, the Zari laughed. They would not laugh for long. The first week was slaughter. Cities burned under orbital bombardment. Oceans boiled where plasma fire struck. Nations collapsed before they could even speak to one another. Humanity was fractured, confused, terrified, and yet something about their fear was different. It did not cripple them. It hardened them. For centuries, the galaxy had mistaken mercy for weakness. Humanity was about to prove how wrong that assumption was. The Zari believed in clean wars. Humanity answered with chaos. When their cities fell, they moved underground. When their armies were crushed, civilians took up arms. Children became messengers. Farmers became soldiers. Scientists turned factories into weapons labs. Every loss taught them something. Every death pushed them further into a darkness they had never known they were capable of. They learned to fight with desperation as their greatest weapon. When the Zari soldiers marched through ruined streets, they found not surrender, but silence. And then explosions from beneath their feet. Entire battalions vanished into fire and rubble. Civilians feigned death and detonated themselves among their captors. Others captured Zari weapons and learned how to use them within days. The Dominion called it barbaric. Humanity called it survival. Months turned to years. Earth was burning, but it was not dead. The Zari could not understand how a species so primitive could fight with such precision, how they adapted to alien technology faster than entire empires. The more the Zari tightened their grip, the more humanity slipped through their fingers. And then something happened that changed everything. A resistance group calling themselves the Ark captured a Dominion warship in orbit. The Zari never understood how it happened, how untrained scavengers broke through the security of a vessel that had once guarded entire sectors. What mattered was what came next. The humans learned. They tore the ship apart. They studied its engines, its weapons, its drive core. Within months, Earth had its first fleet. Within a year, they had their first victory. Within 5, they were no longer defending. They were invading. The first worlds to fall were Dominion outposts, supply stations, unprotected colonies. Humanity moved with feral intelligence, fast, invisible, brutal. They never held territory, never announced themselves. They struck, killed, and vanished. Entire Zari fleets disappeared without a trace, their wreckage found drifting in silence. The galaxy watched, horrified. Humanity had always been dismissed as naive, emotional, fragile. Now they had become something unrecognizable, a force that did not fight for conquest, but for vengeance. For every city burned on Earth, they burned 10. For every human child slaughtered, they erased entire bloodlines of their enemies. And yet, there was no joy in it. Humanity was not celebrating victory. They were simply making sure no one could ever hurt them again. The first major turning point came at Vorsk, 9, a fortress world of the Dominion that had never fallen in battle. When the human fleet arrived, they made no declaration, no warnings, no diplomacy. They simply bombarded the planet until its surface cracked. Oceans turned to steam, the atmosphere burned, and when the fires finally went out, there was no one left alive. Vorsk 9's destruction echoed across the galaxy. The message was clear. Humanity had abandoned restraint. The Dominion began to collapse. Its fleets scattered. Its colonies rebelled. Its leaders begged for peace. But peace was no longer possible. Humanity was not fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting to erase. Within a decade, the Dominion was reduced to a shadow of its former self. The once great empire that had ruled thousands of worlds was now cornered. Its people huddled in fear on the last stronghold, Zalor Prime. Supreme Chancellor Vor, the architect of 1,000 conquests, stood before his shattered council. "They will not stop," whispered one of his ministers. "We must surrender." Vor turned to the window, looking down at the capital burning beneath its own defense grids. "They do not want surrender," he said quietly. "They want extinction." The human fleet arrived days later. There were no messages, no warnings, just silence, and then light. The bombardment began at dawn and ended at dusk. Zari warships, once the pride of the galaxy, shattered like glass. Their defenses failed one by one. Then the ground troops came. What followed was not a battle. It was execution. The humans moved through the streets like an endless tide. Zari's soldiers fought bravely, desperately, but it made no difference. For every human that fell, 10 more replaced them. The palace of the Dominion burned, its towers collapsing into the molten rivers below. And when the smoke cleared, there was no sound, no cries, no screams, no life. Zalor Prime was gone. The Dominion was no more. The galaxy waited for what would come next. Some expected celebration. Others expected diplomacy. What came instead was silence. For 3 years, no one heard from Earth. No ships left their territory. No transmissions crossed the void. Then one message appeared across every galactic channel. 3 words: "We are watching." It was not a statement. It was a sentence. Empires froze. Trade routes halted. Armies disbanded. No one dared move. They remembered the fire of Vorsk 9, the ruins of Zalor Prime, the burning of the Dominion's fleets. They knew what it meant to be seen by humanity. At first, it was quiet. Then, ships began to vanish. Small scout vessels disappeared without a trace. Then convoys. Then entire fleets. There were no distress calls, no survivors, only silence. When communications were intercepted, they carried fragments of static and a voice. Cold, mechanical, human. "You watched as they burned our world. Now we are watching you." The message repeated across every network before vanishing. Panic spread like wildfire. The galaxy turned inward. Worlds sealed their borders, fortified their skies. Even the ancient empires that had stood unchallenged for millennia trembled. The Taiyan Empire, once proud and mighty, was the first to fall. Their fleet vanished in a single night. The survivors spoke of shadows moving through the stars, ships without light or signal. The last transmission came from a dying captain, whispering through static, "They are here." After that, the Taiyans surrendered to no one. Their empire disbanded itself out of fear. Other civilizations followed. Colonies were abandoned. Planets were evacuated. Trade between systems ceased entirely. The galaxy fell into a new kind of peace, the peace of terror. No one dared to fight, not because they loved peace, but because they feared being seen. Over time, stories became legends. Children grew up hearing tales of the humans who rose from the ashes of their own extinction. Some said they had become machines, merging with the very void they once feared. Others whispered that they were still flesh and blood, simply too changed by war to be called human anymore. In the silence between stars, where no light reached and no empire dared to fly, strange signals pulsed through the dark. Echoes of human origin, faint but deliberate. Some believed they were warnings. Others believed they were invitations. None dared to respond, because everyone in the galaxy knew the same truth. When humanity looked at you, it was already too late. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell in the shadow of Earth's silence. But every generation, somewhere in the dark, someone saw it. A ship drifting in the void. No lights, no insignia. Silent but alive. A vessel built from steel and vengeance. Its hull scarred with the ancient words, "Remember Earth." And then it would vanish again, leaving only questions and fear. No one knew what humanity wanted. Maybe even they no longer knew. knew. Perhaps vengeance had devoured the purpose it was meant to serve. Or perhaps, beyond the darkness, there was something worse waiting. A truth the galaxy was never meant to see. Because if humanity had learned one thing from their war, it was this: mercy was a luxury, survival was not enough, and vengeance never ends.